Hello there, here is wishing our viewers a very happy Diwali. Welcome to this edition of our World Panorama, a show that brings you up to date with all the big international news stories that unfolded this week. I'm Aishwarya with you. Here's a look at the top stories first. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wins re-election, but his Liberal Party falls short of majority. Trudeau rules out forming a coalition government, insists on parliamentary support for his minority government. President Evo Morales declared winner in Bolivia elections, avoids a second-round runoff. Angry clashes as opposition claims election was rigged after vote count was paused for 24 hours. EU agrees to delay Brexit. No decision on new deadline date so far. UK admits won't be able to meet Brexit deadline by 31st of October. British MPs to consider Prime Minister Johnson's call for early general election on Monday. Anti-government demonstrations in Lebanon over corruption and economic mismanagement. Protesters reject government's calls for dialogue. Protests also on in Chile. United Nations to investigate claims of human rights abuses after 18 deaths. And Russia and Turkey agree to deploy troops along Syria border to extend ceasefire. Kurdish fighters are told to withdraw 30 kilometers by Tuesday and hand over control to the Russian and Syrian militaries. Our top story this week, Canadian elections 2019 saw close contest between Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party and Andrew Scheer's Conservative Party. While Trudeau's Liberals won the maximum number of seats in Canadian Parliament, they lost their majority and will need to form an alliance or a coalition to form the government. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, the first Sikh leader of a major political party in Canada, is expected to play the role of kingmaker. However, Trudeau has ruled out forming a coalition government and is calling on the other political parties to give parliamentary support to his minority government. Further, despite his victory, Trudeau's image has been tarnished from what it was when he won his first election in 2015.
Joyful mood, if not jubilant, in Liberal Party headquarters in Montreal, as Justin Trudeau's party retained power for second term, winning maximum 157 in the 338-seat parliament, but falling short of the required majority.
From coast to coast to coast, tonight Canadians rejected division and negativity. They rejected cuts and austerity, and they voted in favor of a progressive agenda and strong action on climate change.
However, a narrow election win means Trudeau is now forced to lead a minority government as Prime Minister. He now relies on smaller parties to form the government, like Jagmeet Singh's New Democrats that won 24 seats, down from the previous 44.
I'm hoping that Mr. Trudeau respects the fact that there is a minority government now, which means we've got to work together.
On the other hand, centre-right Conservatives rivals got 121 seats, a marked increase from 95 it had held before. The Canadian vote came down to what was essentially a choice between the handsome and charismatic Trudeau and Conservatives' unassuming leader Andrew Scheer, who was seen as a perfect antidote to Trudeau's flash and celebrity.
Conservatives have put Justin Trudeau on notice. And Mr. Trudeau, when your government falls, Conservatives will be ready and we will win.
Trudeau swept into power in 2015, promising real change and a slew of progressive pledges after almost 10 years of Conservative Party government in Canada. However, a series of scandals combined with high expectations threatened his prospects. An ethics scandal early this year, known as SNC Lavalin Affair, took a major toll on his support. Trudeau's election odds that seemed at risk when images of President wearing blackface, makeup in 3 separate instances, were widely circulated, seen as a major hit to Trudeau's cultivated political image. After a bumpy first term with a minority government, Trudeau surely has bumpy second term right ahead. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And now an update on Brexit, and the European Union has agreed in principle the UK's request for another extension to the Brexit deadline of 31st of October, but has set no new departure date. The decision was taken after EU ambassadors to 27 other member states than the UK met. The UK is scheduled to leave the European Union on 31st of October, but it has asked for another extension to the deadline. Meanwhile, British MPs are expected on Monday to consider the Prime Minister's call for an early general election. Johnson says that he wants to hold one on 12th of December if the EU offers a Brexit delay until 31st of January. The latest move came days after the Brexit legislation was in limbo after the MPs rejected Johnson's plan to get it through the House of Commons in 3 days. Bolivian President Evo Morales has been declared as the winner of the country's elections. The country's electoral tribunal said that Morales had 47.1% of the vote with 99.9% of the ballots counted, avoiding a second-round runoff. Now, there were clashes amid claims of the election being rigged after the vote count was paused for 24 hours. Second-place candidate Carlos Mesa has called for a second round of election, as has the US, Brazil, Argentina and Colombia. Ballot boxes being burned as protesters on Monday set fire to electoral offices in regions of Sucre and Tarija of Bolivia. Clashes breaking out in capital La Paz. Demonstrators scuffled with the police. As President Evo Morales appeared set to win re-election in controversial circumstances.
The second round vote was going to go in favor of Carlos Mesa. So once again, Evo Morales is robbing democracy, once again usurping the sovereignty of the people with crude and shameless fraud.
A day before, first the counting was halted when it looked as if the vote was heading towards a second round runoff. Then, when the counting resumed, President Morales had just enough to win outright. Under Bolivian law, Morales would need a 10 percentage point advantage over his rival to avoid a second round election in December. The official final count is not due for 7 days. One set of observers called the change as drastic and hard to explain.
The OAS mission manifests its profound worry and surprise at the drastic and difficult to explain change in the trend of the preliminary results seen after poll closed. We urge the electoral authorities to firmly defend the will of Bolivia's citizenry.
President Evo Morales' rival, Carlos Mesa, says he will not recognize the result.
This manipulation they did was to completely block a second round, and we denounce it.
In order to soothe frayed tempers, the government says to ensure transparency, it has asked an official observer of the election to conduct an audit of the vote count.
We are asking the Secretary General of the OAS to establish a commission to perform an audit on the entire process of the official vote tally of October 20 elections.
Morales has been in power since 2006 and became the country's first indigenous president. If he is declared the winner of this election, he will be in power until 2025. In a referendum in 2016, the Bolivians rejected his suggestion to ditch the presidential term limits. He needed permission from the courts to run this time his fourth bid for the presidency, as the Bolivian constitution only allows 2 consecutive terms. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. For more than a week, the people of Lebanon have been staging an extraordinary revolt against their politicians. Schools, universities and offices have been closed. The protests were triggered by attacks on WhatsApp voice calls that the government quickly dished. But the government could not contain the anger of a population that is sick and tired of economic stagnation, endemic corruption and a lack of basic public services. The Lebanese economy is currently staggering under one of the highest debt levels in the world. Protesters have rejected the government's call for dialogue and are demanding its resignation. It has been more than a week. People have gathered in central squares of cities across Lebanon, chanting, "Revolution, revolution." Hundreds of thousands of people have rallied, calling on the country's ruling elite to resign over dire economic crisis. Violence also erupted in the streets of Tripoli last week.
I am here to staying in the streets demanding my rights and rights of all those who are paying taxes. I am protesting for our children to find a country to live in and not having to immigrate.
The demonstrations began last Thursday after the government announced new taxes, including a $6 monthly fee on calls on free messaging apps like WhatsApp, unleashing anger against decades of corruption, government mismanagement and nepotism. The proposed tax was scrapped just hours after the protest started, but demonstrations continued. Amidst the unrest, however, on Saturday, protesters shared a sweet moment with a toddler. A car passing through the protest saw a toddler waking up from the loud noise. The protesters then spontaneously broke into a popular song to calm the baby. Lebanon's economy is stagnating and the country has one of the world's highest debt to GDP ratios. The economists have warned of a complete economic collapse. In recent weeks, banks have restricted the withdrawal of US dollars. International donors have pledged to help Lebanon reduce the debt, and the government has promised reforms to bring down expenditures. On Monday, embattled Prime Minister Saad Hariri unveiled a raft of economic reforms. He promised to slash politicians' pay, invest in power plants, and also tax banks to help reduce public debt.
These decisions are not for bartering. You have to know your voice is being heard, and if early elections are something that you want, then I will personally support you in this.
But demonstrators say it is too little, too late, and they are vowing to stay on the streets to topple the regime. The last time Lebanese took to the streets in such large numbers was after the assassination of then Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in February 2005. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And in World Panorama, we'll take a very short break. And after the break, we take a look at another country, Chile, where anti-government demonstrations are on. A state of emergency has been declared. Nighttime curfews are on and troops are on the streets. All the details on Chile unrest on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. The United Nations High Commission on Human Rights is sending a team to Chile to investigate the allegations of human rights abuses against demonstrators amid furious street protests over inequality, falling wages and the rising cost of education and healthcare. Since the unrest erupted on 6th of October, at least 18 people have been killed and more than 535 have been injured. More than 6,000 people have been arrested. While President Pinera later scrapped the transport and electricity fare increases and also announced economic reforms, the moves have failed to appease the protesters. in the Chilean port of Valparaiso being targeted by looters on Thursday. Looters throwing boxes of stuff from a store, the crowd scattering once the police arrived. Police finally dispersing the crowd with a firecracker. Chile is known as one of Latin America's wealthiest, most stable and peaceful countries, but is in the grip of a political and economic upheaval. Thousands of people have been protesting since 6th of October after the government increased public transportation fares. Some turned violent with riots, arson attacks, looting and violent clashes with the police. More than 6,000 people have been arrested.
I do think that this shake-ups in general can serve us quite well. Crisis produce opportunities, and I believe that Chile will rise above. The question is, how long will it take?
On Thursday, protesters and police clashed once again in capital Santiago as authorities extended a curfew for the 6th consecutive night. An apology from President Sebastián Piñera on Thursday failed to temper escalating levels of violence on the streets, which have so far led to at least 18 deaths. The president also announced social and economic reforms, but to no avail.
The problems have been an accumulation of several decades. Various governments were unable to recognize the magnitude of the situation. This situation of inequality, of abuse, which has led to genuine and authentic expression of millions of Chileans. I acknowledge this lack of vision and I ask my compatriots for forgiveness.
Chile's government now says it would be inviting human rights personnel to investigate allegations of human rights abuses.
El presidente de la República, don Sebastián Piñera.
We will invite personnel from High Commissioner of Human Rights as well as members of Human Rights Watch to send personnel to Chile in order to gather information from the ground of current situation. We are very interested in maximum transparency.
Producto de la declaración del estado de emergencia.
Several cities in the country have been placed under a state of emergency as thousands have taken to the streets. The government deployed the military to put down the unrest, the first time since 17-year military dictatorship ended in 1990. But thousands of Chileans have been defying emergency and military curfews. The nation has won worldwide acclaim for its low poverty, inflation and unemployment, rarities in a region still struggling to leave behind economic dysfunction. But the rate of inequality in Chile is among the worst in Latin America. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. Hong Kong has released the murder suspect whose case led to plans to change extradition rules, which then triggered the city's mass protest. Chan Tong-kei is accused of murdering his pregnant girlfriend in Taiwan last year before fleeing back to Hong Kong. But Hong Kong and Taiwan do not have an extradition treaty, and this case was cited when the government proposed amending the law. The controversial bill, meanwhile, was formally withdrawn on Wednesday at its second reading in Parliament. Police on Friday started the process of moving the bodies of 39 people found dead in a refrigerated lorry in Essex. Most of the victims are believed to be Chinese nationals. The police have been granted extra time to question the lorry driver on suspicion of murder. Police believe that the lorry had entered the country via Holyhead in Wales on Sunday, having travelled from Dublin. The ambulance staff discovered the bodies in the container at a Watergate Industrial Park. And huge crowds scrambled up Australia's Uluru on the final day before the climb is banned. The giant monolith, once better known to visitors as the Ayers Rock, will be permanently off limits from Saturday. Uluru is sacred to its indigenous custodians who have long implored tourists not to climb. In 2017, the board of the Uluru National Park voted unanimously to end the climb because of the spiritual significance of the site as well as for safety and environmental reasons. Russia and Turkey this week agreed to deploy their troops to extend a ceasefire along the Syrian border. Under the deal, the Kurdish fighters must withdraw at least 30 kilometers by Tuesday and hand over control to the Russian and Syrian militaries. Turkish President Erdogan warned that if Kurdish fighters fail to do so, his country would use its right to crush them. However, Kurdish-led forces have accused the Turkish troops of violating the ceasefire deal. 2 weeks ago, Turkey had launched a cross-border operation to set up a safe zone on the Syrian side of the border, clear of the members of Kurdish militia.
Syrian-Turkish border looked calm on Wednesday as Turkey and Russia on Tuesday adopted a joint memorandum on the situation in Syria. The agreement, called as historic by both sides, coming after 6 hours of talks on Tuesday between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian host Vladimir Putin in Sochi. The agreement was signed during a pause in Turkey's offensive to drive Kurdish forces out. Under the deal, Syrian and Russian forces will immediately oversee a withdrawal of Kurdish forces and sets out plans for joint Turkish-Russian patrols along the border next week.
Russian and Syrian forces will enter Syrian side of Turkish-Syrian border, outside the area of Operation Peace Spring, to facilitate the removal of YPG elements to the depth of 30 kilometers from Turkish-Syrian border. And then, joint Russian-Turkish patrols will start.
The deal came as a ceasefire brokered by the US was set to expire on Tuesday evening. President Trump hailed the deal as a big success and said it is lifting sanctions imposed on Turkey 9 days ago over its offensive. It's noteworthy that Trump had been heavily criticized at home for abrupt military pullout of the American forces from the region, allowing Turkey's operation against Kurds to take place. Kurds had been key US ally in Syria in the fight against Islamic State terror group in the region. But after signing of Russia-Turkey deal, Trump says what has been going on in Syria has been pretty amazing.
Very volatile part of the world, but so far it's been pretty amazing what's gone on. We've lost no soldiers, we didn't have a soldier hurt, we didn't have a finger broken. It's pretty unusual. And we have thousands of soldiers that have moved out or are moving out of various areas. We have it under very good control. Turkey has done what we've asked them to do.
After the deal, Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Force thanked Russia for saving the Kurds from the scourge of war and also thanked Donald Trump. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad has raised concern about foreign interference in Syria. But Kremlin says he expressed readiness of Syrian and Russian forces to reach Syrian-Turkish border. International organizations say ceasefire in northern Syria offers chance for peace.
The first requirement for having a political solution is to stop the violence, is to stop the fighting. And what we have seen is at least some reduction, some significant reduction in violence and fighting. Then we need to move on, building on that, and then have a real political negotiated solution to the conflict in Syria.
The ceasefire extension has brought further relief in northeastern Syria, where the United Nations says more than 176,000 people have been displaced in just the past 2 weeks. Some 120 civilians have been killed in the battle, along with 259 Kurdish fighters and 7 Turkish soldiers. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
That's all in this edition of World Panorama, but we'll leave you with the visuals of Japan's Emperor Naruhito formally proclaiming his ascension to the throne in an elaborate ceremony. The emperor officially began his reign in the month of May after the abdication of his father, the then Emperor Akihito, but in a series of traditional rituals, his ascension has only now been formalized. And hundreds of foreign dignitaries, including President Ramnath Kovind, were in attendance. So here are the visuals. I'll see you next week in another edition of the program. Bye-bye.